And APB, American Protection Bureau, voted #1 best on Long Island for all your security needs. Call 631-390-9050. That's 631-390-9050. APB. The Monte and the Pharaoh Show is brought to you by...
Because wine is your second favorite four-letter word. California wine, New York attitude. Good fucking wine.
Yeah.
Hey there, peeps. What's going on? Matty Rock here. Welcome to In the Dungeon with AA, Andrew Anderson, the Taskmaster, Kevin Sullivan, and our special guest, UFC trainer, announcer, pro wrestler, and talk show host, Matt Granahan. Thanks for coming on the show, brother. We appreciate you.
Hey, thank you, guys. So I'll use some alliteration to introduce myself to your audience. I am the pernicious purveyor of preposterous pomposity, here to manipulate the minuscule minds of the masses of miscreants. And you could also call me a paragon of pugilistic punditry.
I love it. I love it.
And I'm tapping out because there's too many SAT words at once. Peace. I'll catch y'all on the flip side. I'm out.
Matt, we're glad to have you on the show. Man, me and you know each other for quite some time. And I think the first time you and I met was in Charlotte at the NWA Fan Fest. We got to help talk about Phil Baroni, UFC fighter Phil Baroni turned professional wrestler, and the himself, W Hall of Famer, Rob Van Dam. You could tell that story right now because I think
man,
was pretty amazing at that night.
Yeah, it was good times in Charlotte. The hotel we stayed at had the bar, and then there was a bar that was adjacent to it. And Phil and I stayed up closing down the bars every night. RVD was out there with us every night until the bar closed. And then when the bar closed, that bar owner kept the bar open, and it was open bar for us. First of all, he comped all our drinks, which was awesome. Yep. And he let us stay after, and we're hammered, we're pushing and pulling in the bar, and we go out to the pond. There was a pond out there, and it had a few of the fans there from the fan fest.
That was the river.
I refereed the match.
That was that little river.
Yeah, that little river, that little pond that was in between the hotel and the bar. And I refereed the match between RVD and the New York Badass Phil Baroni in the pond. And during the course of that wild match, RVD's phone got destroyed, landed in the drink there, and RVD went to do his frog splash, and there were rocks all around, and he landed face first.
Oh.
Busted up his face really bad, man. It looked like he'd taken some shots to the head. And the next day, when we all went down to our tables, the rumors started. All the fans thought that Phil had knocked him out, roughed him up at the bar. But that's not what really happened. We had a great time together.
We were having fun.
Yeah. And I gotta mention, Phil. I gotta say this about Phil Baroni because I was up in your neck of the woods. Back in August, I was at the Showboat Casino, and I did a press conference there with Johnny A. John Elite, who's an old gangster from the Gambino family. But he was just featured on that ABC special that they had last week. And I've known a lot of these wise guys down here in South Florida and up there for years. But he has so much history with Phil and Phil's father. And we did this press conference to call out Gotti III, who is an MMA fighter. And that was a great press conference because people don't know Phil's background. And I always said to Phil, we got to do a movie about your life. I say it would be like the modern day Raging Bull, because Phil's father was a Gold Star NYPD detective that worked for the Gambino family. And they used his badge to do a lot of home invasions and drug dealers, a lot of stuff. And Phil, when he was younger, lived with John Elite, and Phil was collecting money by the time he was 17. You know, he was collecting for the mob. There's that story when he was in college, when he was wrestling at Hofstra, where he got stabbed in the back of the head and moved out to Michigan. And he's had a crazy life. A lot of people don't realize Phil's great uncle was also the late, great Captain Lou Albano.
Yeah, I remember that. You told me that.
So fascinating stuff, man. I'll tell you guys.
You had another story to tell Kevin about a connection you have with Kevin with Bob Roop.
Yeah, this is interesting. So I'm with Berman Law Group. I'm our marketing coordinator, and I write stories for the Berman magazine. It's TBT, the Berman Team magazine, and I also host the Berman Team podcast. We're one of the largest personal injury law firms in the East Coast. On the East Coast, we just opened up an office in Charleston. We're down in Florida. Our main office is in Boca Raton, Florida. That's where the podcast studio is. And I just vetted a case this morning. I was just talking to a guy named William Harding. Does that name ring a bell?
No relation to the president that was assassinated.
Or is there?
No, it may be, though. He may be his great grandson. I don't know. But he's the guy who broke Bob Roop's sugar hold in the old sugar hold challenge.
Kevin, tell us.
I remember. I didn't remember the name, but I knew someone broke the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know his story. He's telling me
they had to pay up.
He studied it. He actually. Yeah, he studied that hold for a long time before he went in there. He's actually was a martial artist. He was a wrestler, judoka, and he studied that hold to escape it. And he actually explained to me that he kind of reversed it on Bob. And he has a crazy story. You guys may want to have him on to talk about how they tried not to pay him that night and how he eventually got paid, because that was a challenge for money.
Wow. Yeah, it was $1,000. I remember that. Yeah.
Now, Kevin, did Bob get a lot of famous people in that hold?
No, you know, they always talk about Stu Hart's dungeon. Stu Hart's dungeon, not disparaging it, but it was nothing like when people try to get in the wrestling business in Tampa. At the time, Mike was about 16 years old, and they say, try him first. And Mike would beat these guys up. Then they had to go to Briscoe and both Briscoes. Then they would go to Roop, and then they would go to Matsuda. And these guys left. Tell you a funny story. Eddie was so over in Florida, Eddie Graham. The state senator gave him the flag that flew over the national capital, right?
Wow.
Well, one day I get there, and in comes this guy, and he says he wants to be a wrestler, but he's got a mask on. He comes in and jumps over the top rope, and they send Roop in there. Roop puts the sugar on him, and the guy's bleeding from his nose. He's bleeding from his eyes. He's bleeding from his ears. Different time, different era. He slapped him, and the guy had a singlet on, and the guy tried to run out of the ring. Bob grabbed the singlet, tried to pull him back in, ripped him naked. The guy ran out the door. He was on 106 North Albany, and the next, right up the street, maybe 100 yards, was Kennedy, the main street in Tampa. The police picked him up. They thought he was in a car wreck. They came to 106 North Albany with the guy in the back. And they said, we don't care what you do to them physically. You can't strip them naked. So they gave them, I mean, I saw some brutal beatings there from people.
Well, didn't hear Matsuda break Hogan's leg?
Yeah.
When Hogan was trying to learn how to wrestle?
Yeah, and I mean, I never understood that one. You know, you looked at Hulk back then. You knew he was going to make money. Why did you want to break his leg? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it goes back different time, different era, different culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hero had been a child in Japan during the war. They weren't our great ally as they are now. I mean, you know, I never met Ricky Dozier, but I became friends with Pogo and a lot of the guys that were around then, and they told me how Ricky Dozier would just beat these guys up, and they wouldn't even raise a hand to him. And on YouTube, you can see two of his shoot fights. He had one against a judo guy.
Masahiko Kimura.
Oh, brutal,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When he came on face.
Yep.
And then Inoki had the one against the giant Antonio.
Mhm.
Where
Oh,
he kicked him.
yep.
Hey,
Man,
yeah,
Yeah. You know,
Did
that Masahiko Kimura is actually the guy that the Gracies named the double wrist lock. The double wrist lock's
Kimura.
been around forever, but they
Right.
named it after him. And Ricky Dozen beat the hell out of Kimura.
yeah.
And yeah.
Now,
Yeah,
wasn't
this
it
is great.
Maeda that beat up Andre that was kicking Andre's legs out in Japan?
Yeah, you know, I'm trying to remember. That wasn't Takada. That was
It was Maeda. Akira Maeda.
Yeah, that was Maeda. Yeah.
Yeah, Andre was really drunk, and they wanted Andre to smarten Maeda up, but Andre was too drunk, and Maeda was kicking the shit out of his legs.
Just kicking his legs. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we wrote about a lot of that stuff in the book. I did a book with Eric Paulson, who was world Shuto champion and one of my coaches and trainers in MMA. He was a great man, great guy, great history. He was the only American to ever win the championship, world Shuto championship, and that was early MMA in Japan. And Shuto came out of professional wrestling from Tiger Mask, and
Wow.
that's a promotion that was one of the earlier promotions in Japan, and then goes to today. You know, there's still Shuto today. And,
Our co-host Matty Rock is a world famous prosciutto champion.
Prosciutto.
Hey,
There you go.
Hey, what's wrong with that? Hey, you know, what's wrong? I can jam with the best of the prosciuttos, but Andrew just brought up something that I find fascinating whenever I get to talk to MMA guys and mixed martial arts guys, and it's that move from MMA to wrestling. So as a guy who did Muay Thai for 15 years and I trained people, the whole art is the balance is entirely different. And, you know, Andrew laughs and Kevin laughs. When you get into a Muay Thai ring or another ring, your whole thing is to keep your balance and your feet under you, right? Then you get into a wrestling ring, and I remember literally the first 5 times I tried it, all I did was roll up into a ball and fall. So,
well, I have a different experience, guys, a much different experience with pro wrestling. I was a wrestler in high school, got to actually headline my Norwalk High for the Mats. I was our team captain in high school, and then in college wrestling. Then I got into judo, and that was how I got into pro wrestling. Before there was really MMA, I got into pro wrestling because one of my buddies at Akari Judo up in Danbury, Connecticut, was doing pro wrestling. And I said, God, I always wanted to get into it. And we just practiced in the judo school, and he took me around as his opponent. And that was how I got into it. And I brought guys from the mat to the ring and had matches that stole the show, like Steve O'Pony, who's a wrestler at Anderson College. I brought Shane Lee when he was at the Citadel. We had a shoot at a show that Drew's buddy Chuck Sloan did with Angry Grandpa. It's got over 4 million views. We had a shoot on a shooting that show when we were drinking. We were hammered, and I had coached him in high school And all his old high school teammates were around, and I had like 20, 25 pounds on him, but I was a lot older. We were both hammered. I was right around 40 when this show, and we got in the ring, and he hit me with a flash double, and it took everything I had to get to cradle him. I got him in a crossface cradle, but I was blowing up, and he was, embarrassing me. But I've always felt in professional wrestling that it make it. And this was what one of my mentors, Billy Wicks, told me. He said, work a shoot, and make it look as realistic as possible. And I still don't break kayfabe when I'm doing stuff. I had that feud with Adam Newsom, who was a rival of mine from MMA. And we kept it so close where everybody thought that thing was a shoot.
Really trying to kill each other in the wrestling ring. It was great. Even the boys you had them worked.
Yeah, exactly. That was what me and Baroni said years ago. We started saying, work the workers. If you can work the workers, oh, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, hey, Andrew, I want to interrupt for a second. I heard you say Billy Wicks. Are you talking about Billy Wicks from Tennessee?
Yeah. Sputnik Monroe, Billy. Yeah, he was like a second father to me.
Sputnik Monroe and him?
Yeah.
The biggest house for probably 40 years until Hogan came there, even outdrawing Jerry Lawler. Billy Wicks, I never met him, but I knew Sputnik very well.
Yep.
And everybody I knew said that Billy Wicks was the real deal.
Yeah, he's such a great man. He it was funny because he had a school in Asheville, this going back like 15 years ago. And it was at the old Barbell Club in Arden. And I used to train there. It was for grappling. It was a shoot school, a lot of local, MMA fighters. And I just knew him as an old man that could stretch guys. I didn't know his pro history. And then he kind of took me under his wing. And because he knew I was doing pro wrestling. One of the other guys said, you got to talk to this guy. He's doing pro wrestling. And we became friends before his death. And I had he's such a great man, such a good guy. He actually wrote the foreword for the book I did with Eric Paulson, the Rough and Tumble book. Gene LaBelle wrote the other foreword because Gene was a mentor of Eric's. And we traced the history of pro wrestling, MMA, and amateur wrestling. A lot of people don't know amateur wrestling pre-1930s, before Hugo Apoplik changed the rules. They had choke pins, and it was a lot dirtier, a lot more submissions, and that went on to the carnies.
Yep. They wasn't that when they first started to outlaw fish hooking?
Yeah, fish hooks, choke pins, neck cranks, arm locks, twisting arm locks.
They would call that the era of the fish hook, because that's when fish hooking was still legal to.
Dirty wrestling.
Carried on.
The dirty wrestling still carried on though with coaches, and it didn't completely go away. I mean, God, Matt.
No, that was also a parallel with bare knuckle fighting. It was something that was always around. But people, like you and I, we both had an amateur background, and we both did MMA and collegiate wrestling and everything. And but a lot of these kids nowadays, they don't understand what it's like. Everybody wants to be a tough guy, but they don't know what we went through to get to where we are in professional wrestling.
They don't pay their dues anymore. That's it. No one wants to pay their dues. They just want to get where they're going.
I know that Matt, and I can speak for Matt with this, that Matt Granahan and I both would consider the Cirque du Soleil that goes on to be what we grew up and were trained to do. Right, Matt?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I'll tell you, Billy Wicks told me he said, this is what you need to tell people on the mic. You need to tell them in the ring that there is nothing I do to my opponent in this ring that I can't do to every one of you slobs that buys a ticket to see me. And that was the way he drilled into me in professional wrestling. And I think it's professional wrestling has lost that. It's lost the larger than life aspect and the reality based aspect. And I'll tell you, it would be wise to go back to that because they'd be able to get more of the MMA fans. They're doing it a little bit, because they've got Brock in there with Bobby Lashley.
Now,
Yeah,
Matt,
but
when I walk down the street, people know either the freak show is in town or you're a pro wrestler. That's the bottom line. I always said one thing that you and I always had in common. You know what I'm saying? They knew we were something, And I also want to throw Kevin in this because Kevin really hasn't really gotten into this. But Kevin, I want you to tell Matt the first time you wrestled Mike Graham, how it came about.
They were going to put me and Mike as a tag team. So Eddie said, I want you guys to work out. Matsuda had the gym too. So he said, be there at 9:30. And I get there at 9:30. He says, I want you guys to shoot. So I'm working, and I was a fair amateur wrestler. Mike was very good. But I was definitely holding my own with him. And then I realized I could be cute myself out of a job. So I ended up, not that he couldn't beat me, but I don't think he would have beat me as easy as we went about 15 minutes. And then he got me and he pinned me. It wasn't a stretcher or a shoot hold, you know what I mean? And I saw, it's funny, listen to this. There was a guy named George McQuarrie. He was an alternate on the 1960 wrestling team that went to Mexico City. Bob Orton Jr. had just started out. And he was, just started out, right? And Eddie would come to it don't matter who booked me or Dusty or JJ, Tom Ernesto, Louis Tillett, didn't matter. Eddie came to TV. So I'm listening to Eddie give the finishes, and then he comes up to the Orton and McQuarrie says, I want you guys should go out there and shoot. I don't care who wins. And they had a shoot match on television.
Wow.
Yeah. He kept it so tight. You know what I mean?
Who went over on that? Who wound up going over?
McQuarrie. He was older. He had, even though Orton definitely held his own, funny thing, Orton had he went to high school in Florida for a while, and he won the state championship, I think, 2 years in a row in Florida. He was definitely no slouch, but when you're going against the alternate for the Olympic team, it's
level, yeah.
Level.
Hey, listen, I think it's time for us to pay the bills, Matty. What do you think?
Yep. Let's take a quick 2 seconds, ladies and gentlemen, so we can pay the bills and hear from our sponsors. Catch you back in 2 seconds.
You need a body shop? You need engine repair? Auto Excellence, Collision Specialists, 631-261-6420. That's 631-261-6420. Auto Excellence.
Do you treat your dog as part of the family? Well, so do we. So why not celebrate your pup's birthday with the ultimate party box? Check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Party Pup Info, and let us make your pup's party or any celebration perfection.
Hey, everyone. Welcome back. We got Matt on the show, along with AA and the Taskmaster.
Hey, Matt. So Matt, tell us a little bit about your relationship with another wrestler who you were, another MMA fighter who you've been involved with, who was actually the world-class Wrestling Revolution heavyweight champion for quite some time.
Oh, Stephan Bonner, the American Psycho. Yeah, and this is something that I'll tell you. This is something that I'd like to talk to Kevin about, because I know Kevin worked on the booking side as well.
I
in
love
professional
Stephen
wrestling.
Bonner. I love Stephen Bonner. I met him in California. His interviews were so good. So good. They were so true. I don't understand why that guy doesn't have a job on top. The guy has energy all day long. What he did, he saved UFC, right? That
Oh
fight,
yeah. The fight with Forrest Griffin, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Didn't it go
And
from
he saved Bellator. He saved Bellator. He saved UFC. That 2005 fight is what made UFC a household name.
Household name, yeah.
But a lot of people don't realize or forget too. And that's what I was going to talk to Kevin about is when I managed Stephen Bonner, I was a prime marketing consultant briefly for Bellator, and it was right when they went on Spike TV, and it was a crazy time because Spike UFC had built up Spike, and UFC went and left to go to Fox. So Bellator, we were a smaller fight promotion, but we were trying to get those UFC fans. And what I wanted to do, I wanted to take the Stephen Bonner Forrest Griffin fight and have it as a rematch on Bellator. But we couldn't get Forrest because he was in his contract with UFC. So we got the next best thing. We got the guy that was all over the news media because of his antics in UFC and his antics with his wife, Jenna Jameson. We got Tito Ortiz.
Right.
And Bonner is so good at cutting a promo that we brought Justin McCulley in under a mask, who had been Tito's old training partner. And we put him in the cage with Bonner, and we didn't smarten Tito up at all because we knew that Tito was going to go off when Bonner cut a promo. And Bonner cut a promo that I would put up against anything that's on any other broadcast in the last 10 years to set up that fight with Tito. And Tito, of course, attacked him, and they did a pull apart. But Bonner's one-liners in that promo were great, cutting up on Jenna Jameson, and then they took the mask off of McCulley. And it was the only time ever that Bellator beat UFC head-to-head in the ratings. They were both on TV that night, Bellator on Spike, UFC on Fox, and we beat them head-to-head in the ratings with that Tito Ortiz Stephen Bonner fight, which was a barn burner of a fight. It was a split decision. The judges gave it to Tito, but it could have gone either way. But it was the promotion and the build up to that. And that's the thing. UFC and Bellator are doing pro wrestling a lot of times better than pro wrestling nowadays.
I agree with that.
Absolutely. But here's where my question is, right?
Yeah.
Why hasn't somebody signed them?
Well, Bonner, unfortunately, he sustained a pretty bad injury. I had a mixed tag match with Bonner and the girls of Blow, the beautiful ladies of oil wrestling, and he loves to come off the top rope with the Macho Man elbow. Now, when he hit it on me, he landed it. He landed it well, but in a match last year, it was in the fall. He injured himself really bad, and he's been actually using a walker for some time. He was in the hospital for quite some time, so he's been injured for a while. But it's also, I think Kevin, the other thing with Bonner is he had that UFC Hall of Fame career already. He was inducted into the Hall of Fame, and he's told me that he just loves the indies, working the indies. And I'll tell you guys a real funny story. Bonner's first pro wrestling match, you guys will appreciate this. His first pro wrestling match was in House of Glory in New York at the New York City Arena. And I had booked him for the match. I was calling those matches. I was broadcasting for them. And it was supposed to be against Matt Riddle. And we got the word 3 hours before the show that Matt Riddle pulled out. And when I was doing the broadcast, I said, Riddle got a case of pussyitis. And he was replaced by Sho Tanaka, right? So the promoter goes, you got this guy Sho Tanaka. He's done some MMA in Japan. He's a New Japan guy. And first thing I said was, does he speak English? And they said, oh, yeah. We get there. He doesn't speak a word of English. And they had that match without him speaking English at all. And I think for Bonner's debut, I think that was a great match. He's a natural. He's really a natural.
He is.
I
He's a go
believe
with the flow
so.
kind of guy. He's a really go with the flow kind of guy. He's got the basics down in pro, and he carried. He's actually the guy who brought pro wrestling, in my opinion, to UFC. He put the panache into Bellator and MMA. So he, in my eyes, Stephan Bonner is the guy who brought wrestling into UFC, as far pro wrestling into UFC, the entertainment value to it. So I'll always credit that. You know,
Definitely, Drew. And I would say even before that, Baroni did it with the robes, the dancing.
Yeah, the look. But
yeah.
but interview-wise, Bonner did. Interview-wise, did.
Yeah,
Promo,
definitely.
you know,
Definitely.
And we're always, and this is where you and I really hit it off, because you were always his pitch man. You were always Phil's pitch, but you were always the hidden gem as far as I'm concerned. And me and you talked about tagging many. Me and you talked about.
I'd love to tag with you. Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing correctly now? Then I'm going to see a tag match happening soon, right?
I'd
What am I
love to
thinking of?
tag with you.
Me and
You know
Matt,
what, Drew? I'd love to tag with you against. I'd love to tag with you against Bob Carson and George McKay.
we should do it.
Yeah, we got two fighters.
Kevin's already starting to write emails and make phone calls. I smell it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Matt, before we forget, I know we were talking about your book. Are you able to get your book online at Amazon? Or if not, let everybody know where they can grab a copy of it, brother.
Sure. We just did a 14-year retrospective with Eric out at Combat Submission Wrestling. And there's a deal right now on the book. If you go to ErikPaulson.com, ericpaulson.com, where you get the book and you get a really cool t-shirt that goes along with it.
Right.
Awesome.
On. So everybody remember where you can go get that.
We can see you at WrestleCon in Dallas at all. Kevin
Well,
and
let
I,
me interrupt. I have a book out. I don't, Matt. My wife does. Andrew, take it away. And
book called
I heard about that.
Old School by L.A. Taylor, and it's about wrestling the way it used to be. Actually, wrestling from its infancy during the old Port City days of pro wrestling from the 90s.
Basically, it's wrestling meets The Sopranos.
Yeah, it's basically.
Where they can get the
I
book,
want to
guys.
see. I want to read that.
And I actually wound up sending you something how UFC was originally mob run, how it started up, and this is basically.
Hey, do you know how where Dana White lives?
The Fertitti brothers.
Yeah, in Southie,
No,
right?
he
Yeah.
lives where my family grew up. He lived in South Boston. He used to have a gym where for women and guys to get in shape just by doing MMA, not wrestling. You know what I mean? Not hooking up, just the exercise. One day, Kevin Weeks and Whitey came in and said, "You owe us $2,500." He said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "It's the tax." He went home that night. Dana went home that night. They called him and said, "Have it ready tomorrow at 1:00 or something will happen." And Dana said, "What do you mean something will happen?" He said, "You don't want to find out." Dana hung up the phone, made a reservation on Delta, flew to Vegas one way, and got away from South Boston.
Oh yeah, and I'll tell you guys something crazy. Dana White tells that story about leaving South Boston, and and that's a great history. But what Dana White never talks about, and this is really interesting, guys, and I'll try to give you the quick Reader's Digest version. A lot of people don't know who the Fertitta family is and the Fertitta brothers, where he got his money. They used to run Galveston, Texas with the Macios. Yep. Galveston was one of the most successful mob-run cities in America for decades. They made a fortune. They kept that city clean. They kept crime out. They had the most brothels per square mile of anywhere. They had a beautiful casino right on the water on the boardwalk, and they ran that city. They ran shylocking, they ran the gambling, they ran the prostitution, and they had the cops under their thumbs, the judge under their thumbs. It was the Texas Rangers that broke that city up and broke up Galveston, and then the Fertittas went to Vegas. And they are actually, there's characters that represent the Fertitta brothers in the movie Casino. They started with the casinos. They always reported to Carlos Marcello back in the day, who was the mob boss out of New Orleans. A lot of people don't realize I'm Irish like Kevin, and I'm also Sicilian. And the first Sicilians came to New Orleans through New Orleans. And Carlos Marcello was a very powerful guy. The Fertitta brothers, very powerful. They caught Frank Fertitta the second, who's the father of the brothers, on a wiretap, skimming money. He did some time for bribery, but didn't do a lot of time. They cleaned all that money in Vegas, and the Fertittas were literally billionaires when they bought the company with Dana White. They bought it from Art Davies, a really good friend of mine, great guy who started the old UFC when it was tournament style. They bought it in 2000, around 2000, 2001 for $2.5 million, right? They sold the company in 2016 for $4.2 billion. So you want to talk about a successful mob family. And I just want to share one quick thing with you guys that's kind of an inside baseball thing when it comes to the mob and the Fertittas and the UFC. I always said that they used a lot of those mob tactics in the Zuffa era of the UFC. I had a fighter that was a training partner of mine that I managed. He was a hot commodity, one of the best wrestlers in MMA, Kamal Shalarus. He was undefeated in WEC when they were on Versus. He was signed by UFC when they purchased WEC. Now, the way that the fighters back then, and this is going back some time, the money in it's a lot better now, but this is going back 12, 13 years ago. At that time, UFC signed you on a 3-fight deal, and you only got 3 fights a year. Okay, so I'm just going to throw some numbers out there. Kamal's was around 12. So 8,000, 8,000, 12,000. First thing Mike Murch from Zuffa did is he says, I want to sit down with you and I want to go over Kumar's sponsors. Calls them Kumar to kind of belittle him. That's part of how they did this, to shakedown. We went through the sponsors. First one was Tap Out. Kamal was getting 10 grand. They said, okay, we're taking 6,500. Okay. Second sponsor, they took a couple grand. And I'm looking and I'm like, oh my God, they are profiting 4 to 5 grand on his first fight. And it was like that way all the way up the card until you got to the co-main event. It was like an amateur show. They were actually making money on the fights. And then when it gets to co-main, the money got a lot better, but they had this surplus of thousands of dollars. So they were using those mob tactics during. And I'm not judging them. They were very successful. It's just the way it is. But that's something interesting to share to people. And that all changed in 2016 when Endeavor purchased the company. And a lot of people don't know it's Ari Emanuel, who the Entourage TV show was based on, the fictitious character Ari, who heads the Endeavor, which is the international conglomerate that purchased the UFC in 2016. But they bought it for $2.5 million. They sold it for $4.2 billion.
Amazing. Hey, you know what?
After this episode, I feel that we're all going to have to go on witness protection. You could call me Sniffles. My name is Sniffles Calzone.
With me, guys.
Hey, my name is Sniffles Calzone. I live in Connecticut.
Janice over Jersey. She's going to tell my Uncle fucking Junior to protect us all. And we keep the freaking the cannelloni out of our mouths, you know.
Yeah, we had a good run, right?
So the first guest on the Berman Law Group on our Berman Team podcast, they want to compete with Valuetainment. So they want to get these wise guys, because Valuetainment did the thing with Sammy the Bull and who's the real scumbag. And so I got Larry Mazza, who was a good friend of mine from the Colombo family, and he was the last guest from Valuetainment. So you guys want to check that out on Berman Law Group. We're not like the movie The Firm or anything, you know, the old Tom Cruise movie.
Hey, listen, guys, while we're at it, I just want to give a quick shout out to my friend Dave Heath Gangrel. Him and Susan Nelson got married this past Wednesday. I was at their wedding in Hollywood, Florida, on the beach, and we had the reception at La Tub, and a lot of people were there. WWE's Rusev, now known as Miro from AEW, Sin Bodhi, Tokyo Monster, Cahagas, myself, and
Andrew, I hate to interrupt you, but we want to thank our good friend Craig Massey and wish him well in Saudi Arabia.
Craig Massey's heading to Saudi Arabia too. He's heading on a business deal with Saudi Arabia. He also comes out with us as part of our Dungeon of Doom. He's an intricate character with us, and he's been with us in SWE, Fury, and in World Class. Also, we want to give a plug out to Linda Sullivan, L.A. Taylor, on her book, Old School. So you can get that at Amazon.
And
I'm gonna read that.
Here's something funny. As
Matt,
we were just talking, we're talking about Galveston.
Port City.
There it is.
Port City.
Yeah.
All the old port cities were mob run in the old wrestling, the old era of professional wrestling, all the way down to all the to Boston, Chicago, New York, Newark, LA, Galveston,
Detroit,
right there. And so it all comes down.
So Andrew, that's interesting because when you say Detroit, because I was asked to be on a show last week. It's the grandson of Jack Tocco, who was the mob boss in Detroit. He has a podcast. He talks about all the Detroit mob stuff, and he wanted me to come on and talk about the Fertitas and all this stuff. So it's and I
funny, just that link the other day, the other night. I saw you.
Yeah, that was the show. Yeah, that's the guy there. I can't wait to read this book that Kevin's wife wrote. That sounds awesome. That's right up my alley. I'm going to get that.
You can get it on Amazon.com.
I'm going to pick that up. And I want to ask you guys something about wrestling, though, real quick. I read a blurb real quick. I read a blurb the other day, maybe it was yesterday, that Shane McMahon has been fired. I was just wondering what's going on with that.
No clue.
Right.
Do you have any?
This is my belief. He's not fired. He owns a huge amount of stocks. His father's mad at him, put him in the doghouse. Where's he going to go? AEW? First of all, I would think that Tony Khan wouldn't bring in his competition and put him in that position, I would think. And the other thing is, I don't think that the kid's going anywhere. He might have had a bad night, but I'll give Shane this credit. Shane's a hard-working guy. When he jumped off that cage and they carried him out, you remember that?
It's amazing. That was spectacular.
He's an athlete.
And he put up his thumb. He was sending a message to the dressing room. Guys, if I have the guts to do it, I'm not going to ask you to do anything I wouldn't do. It was one of the amazing messages I've ever seen. I'm a big fan of his, even though I've never met him. Hey.
He's an athlete, Kevin. We used to see him up at the he used to smoke up at the Grand Havana Room in New York, so we'd see him all the time. And he's quite the athlete, man. I tell you.
He was impressive. Always very impressive. Great athlete. You know, I grew up in Norwalk, Connecticut, right up the road from Stanford, and the WWE building there. Great guys. And I know Pete Gastorino, Pete Gas.
Yeah, Pete Gas.
Had him on my old podcast. He's a good dude. Yeah, he's a real good dude. And you know, I never met Shane, but I was just shocked to read that because I know he's so integral to the company. But I wanted to backtrack and just tell something else because I think your viewers will find this fascinating too with the UFC. So Lorenzo Fertitta, one of the Fertitta boys, was on the Nevada State Athletic Commission when before Dana was going to buy the company, when my buddy Art owned the company. This is a funny story Art told me. So they wanted to get sanctioning in Vegas, and that would have driven the value of the company up tremendously, right?
Mhm.
So the only guy that was the holdout that stopped sanctioning was Lorenzo Fertitta. He denied sanctioning, and then 90 days later, they bought the company. So they devalued the company and then bought it. So talk about, mob tactics there. But man, it's great to be on here with you guys. I really appreciate your time.
I'm so happy with Connect, man. It's been a long time. The whole COVID thing kept me and you apart for a while, but we've always had a great relationship, you and I, and ever since that night, that drunken night in Charlotte, me and you had a
Watch how you say that, buddy.
we had a good time.
Have you seen Chucky lately, Chuck Sloan?
No, I speak to him occasionally on Facebook, but I love Chuck, man. I miss Chuck. We had a lot of fun over the years. He was actually a crucial part of my formative years in wrestling in the early '90s. I wrestled him a lot back then. So
Chuck goes back to the Monster Factory.
Yeah.
In Jersey, the original Monster Factory.
And I wrestled him pro wrestling for Gino Caruso back then. So
Chuck actually started before that down out in Texas with Chris Adams. He was part of the he was part of the same team, the same group with Stone Cold.
Wow, no shit. Yeah, he's been around forever. He's a great dude, man. Never really caught a break, but he's always been a great talent and a great guy to work with. And
I love the wrestling in because Chuck was a really solid amateur. He could follow you, and when two amateurs are going out and you leave openings for each other, it makes for a great match. So you're wrestling, Drew, you leave openings for each other. It makes for a match. And I'll tell you, the first time I wrestled Chuck was in Spartanburg at APW, and the security guys came up to us and they said, "That was real. You guys were really going at it." So when you can fool the security guys, it's fun.
Him and I used to go all over the building, just brawl. We used to brawl constantly. We just have these both start off wrestling, hold for hold, and then go into a brawl. One of us would just turn heel the other and just start pounding each other. People like, "Are you guys really freaking killing each other?" We'd walk in the back and they were like, "Oh, there's going to be a fight." And it was man. It was always good working with him, man.
You know who Chuck had some brawls with too up there, and we should say R.I.P. That was up there from your area was Balls Mahoney.
Oh, he loved Balls. Loved working with Balls. John was a great guy. John was a great guy.
A lot of people don't know
demons.
Balls. A lot of people don't know Balls had a good solid amateur background up there in Jersey.
Great amateur background.
Yeah.
He never had to use it. That's the whole thing. But he never had to use it. He found his niche. And once you find that niche, you find where you belong, where you fit in, you use it to the best of your ability, and he loved the hardcore. He was leading all over the place. Yeah, he was a really good guy, but like I said, he had his own demons, Unfortunately, we all have our demons, you know what I'm saying? So if we didn't have our own demons, we wouldn't have either. So that's the way I look at it,
I want to lighten up the mood, Drew. I want to lighten up the mood as I go. I wanted to tell you guys a joke that's been going around. I don't know if you heard this joke. What's 240 pounds, dashingly handsome, and disappears in an instant?
What?
Oh, that was well done.
Way to end the show. Matt Granahan, ladies and gentlemen. Love you, Matt. Thanks for being a guest on the show. Kevin, we're going to be doing Wrestle Daytona in April, and we got a whole bunch of other stuff coming up. We have March. We're coming back to World Class Championship Wrestling, and I'm in the UK in February for World Pro Wrestling for February 19th at Cheltenham in UK, working with James Mason, and we got other great talents on that show like Tajiri and Jody Fleisch. Hernandez and everything else. But in the meantime, guys, I want to thank you for joining in on In the Dungeon with Kevin Sullivan, Matty Rock, and myself, the reinforcer Andrew Anderson. We had a great guest tonight in Matt Granahan. And Kevin, anything closing comments?
No, I thought it was very interesting and there were very similar stories that we were telling from the founding of wrestling to the founding of the UFC. So I thought it was a very, very interesting show. Thank you, Matty. Thank you, Andrew. And I'll talk to you guys soon.
Much love, guys. And like I said, after this, I will be putting a call into the witness protection program for all of us involved. I feel we might need it.
in the dungeon Saturday night at 9 p.m.
Much love, peeps. Catch y'all later.
Bye-bye, guys.